Welcome to our Bon Facts podcast with Matt and Joanna. We provide valuable information that affects your everyday life, and for your entertainment only.
Hello everyone. Welcome to our podcast. Today's topic is honey. What we are about to say will help you avoid toxic honey, and how to make the right choice when purchasing honey. Why is honey a miraculous product? What happened to the honey industry? You will learn more about honey fraud, and honey supply chain. Why do we need to avoid Chinese honey? What to look for, when purchasing honey? What has the United States done to protect consumers? The reality about honey can be very disturbing. At the end of the podcast, you will find out why you are better off eating sugar instead of honey. We will go over a few successful cases, reported by the United States Department of Homeland Security. They will shock you.
Matthew, why is honey a miraculous product?
Except for a small portion of the population who is allergic to honey, studies found that consuming minimum processed natural honey is far more beneficial than sugar or corn syrup. Honey is a miraculous food produced by hard-working bees, using a complex and lengthy process. Pure natural honey is mainly composed of sugar, but it also has many other beneficial nutrients. Unlike sugar, honey contains proteins, enzymes, amino acids, vitamins, and minerals.
Interesting. I know that recently, bee pollen has gained traction in the health community because it is loaded with nutrients, amino acids, vitamins, and over 250 other active substances. Furthermore, researchers found that pollen promotes healing and has beneficial effects against inflammatory and infectious diseases.
Joanna, why did we tell the audience at the beginning that people are better off using sugar than honey?
Well, that is $1 million question. We will find out about it. Let me ask you this. Why are bees so important to us beside producing the delicious honey that we love?
Well, farmers love bees because they pollinate fruit trees. Do you know that beekeepers also have a secondary source of income? From crop producers who pay for the use of bees to pollinate their crops. In 2017, the USDA reported nearly 3 million bee colonies from operations, with 5 or more beehives. Fees are the highest in the California and Arizona region, with $273 million in revenues.
Wow, $273 million in revenues. That is a lot of money. This means that California farmers cannot prosper without bees. In other words, the price of your fruits would go up because less crops will be produced with fewer bees.
Let's go over why the United States is the largest honey importer. And who is the world's largest exporter? In 2018, per capita consumption was 1.7 pounds, including 65% of honey used in processed food. The United States honey production was 152 million pounds, while domestic consumption was 592 million pounds. According to the National Honey Board, per person consumption of honey has doubled in the United States since the 1990s. However, American domestic honey production is 35% less than it was 20 years ago.
I did not realize that we consume that much honey. No wonder we have a honey deficit.
The mismatch between domestic production and demand has triggered the United States to import a lot more honey. At one time, most honey came from Argentina, Brazil, Canada, Mexico, and Uruguay. But not anymore. In 2019, the United States was the largest importer of honey, with over $430 million, or 21.4% of the world's total honey import. Over one-third came from China and its neighboring countries such as India and Vietnam. Please note that the official share of honey imported from China seems to be low, but in reality, some Chinese honey may have been shipped through India or Vietnam to avoid the hefty import tariff. You will find out about that later in this chapter. In 2001, China's domestic honey production was 252,000 metric tons. By 2016, The yield of honey was 700,000 metric tons. In 2019, China was the world's largest exporter of honey at $235.3 million, or 11.8% of the total world's honey export. However, in 2020, the COVID-19 lockdown hindered operations for some 250,000 beekeepers in China, who produce roughly 1/4 of the global supply. Traditionally, many of them routinely move their colonies around the country as far as 3,000 kilometers, or 1,900 miles, in a single season in search of pollen and nectar to feed their bees.
That is a significant increase in honey production. Are you sure that it is honey, and not sugary syrup? Matthew, as you mentioned earlier, Chinese honey have been shipped through other Asian countries to avoid heavy tariff. Why?
Well, I got news for you. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, which opened the door, and allows China to trade with its members, including the United States. Meanwhile, the United States Department of Commerce realized that Chinese-origin honey was being sold in the United States, for less than fair market value. The situation would force hundreds of American beekeepers out of the business. As a result, the United States government imposed an anti-dumping tariff on Chinese honey, which is currently at $1.20 per pound.
Really? I did not know about this.
These honey producers began using various illegal methods to conceal their honey origin, to avoid the U.S. heavy import tariff. Unfortunately, the constant inflow of the cheap Chinese honey has been forcing down the wholesale price of honey, below the levels that American beekeepers need to operate. If beekeeping becomes a money-losing business in the United States, there will be fewer hives and fewer bees. Without the bees, many crops in America would not be pollinated, resulting in much higher fruit prices.
So, I am curious to know about Chinese honey wholesale price versus American honey wholesale price. Matthew, do you know?
Of course I do. In 2019, the United States Department of Agriculture reported the average wholesale price for American-produced honey was around $2.50 per pound, while Chinese honey was about 57 cents to 90 cents per pound, including freight and insurance.
Wow, that is really low. Even with the $1.20 per pound of import tariff, Chinese honey is still cheaper. But avoid paying it is even better.
Yes, you are right. That is why they transship Chinese honey to other countries, before reaching the United States.
Matthew, what is transship?
Chinese honey producers ship their honey to a third-party country, relabel their honey as originating from that third-party country, and then export it to the United States to avoid heavy tariffs. This method is called transshipment. Transshipping and mislabeling of Chinese imports to the United States can complicate U.S. Product Safety Agency's efforts to keep out dangerous products.
That is just terrible and deceiving. But some people do whatever it takes to make more money.
Joanna, listen to this. While Chinese honey imports to the United States have gradually declined, imports from India, Malaysia, and Vietnam have increased dramatically, following the imposition of heavy duties on Chinese honey in 2001. Of course, Chinese honey were transshipped to these countries. In fact, very large U.S. honey packers are knowingly buying them because they are cheap, and their chances of getting caught are slim. As much as 1/3 of all the honey sold in the U.S. may be illegally imported from China.
Okay, let me be the devil advocate here. If the price of Chinese honey is cheap, consumers can save money. What is the big deal? And why should we avoid buying it?
Chinese beekeepers use several Indian-made animal antibiotics, including chloramphenicol, to fight diseases that wiped out their bee colonies. Medical researchers found that children given chloramphenicol as an antibiotic are susceptible to DNA damage and cancer. The FDA banned its presence in food. In August 2002, the FDA and the United States Customs and Border Protection announced that they had discovered bulk imports of Chinese honey that were contaminated with chloramphenicol.
DNA damage and cancer in children. That is horrifying. Parents do their best to keep their children safe and healthy. I cannot imagine if contaminated Chinese honey is in kids' cereal or snacks. This brings up another topic: cancer in children is increasing.
Chinese honey is also contaminated with lead. Lead is a poison affecting virtually every organ system, primarily the central nervous system, particularly the developing brain. Consequently, children are at a greater risk than adults of suffering from the neurotoxic effects of lead. The lead contamination in some Chinese honey has been attributed to thousands of mom-and-pop vendors, who use small, unlined, lead-soldered drums to collect and store the honey, before it is delivered to honey brokers for processing. Between 2002 and 2004, Chinese honey was banned in the European Union, because of lack of origin labeling and lead contamination risk. However, the ban was lifted due to increased demand of honey in Europe.
Again, I am just horrified about this. I did not know anything about Chinese honey, and wish I have known more about this long time ago.
Chinese honey is also low quality and adulterated. The simplest way to adulterate honey involves adding sugar or syrups directly to honey. The second way to adulterate honey is feeding bees sugar or syrups during the main nectar flow period, when flower nectar is abundant. This is known as indirect adulteration and should not be done by proper beekeeping method. Indirect adulteration is extremely difficult to detect.
Wow. First you told me Chinese honey is contaminated with dangerous antibiotic and lead. Now, it may be mixed with sugar. Matthew. What else that I do not know?
Joanna, remember we mentioned earlier that bee pollen is beneficial to health. Guess what? In addition to the contamination and adulteration issues, Chinese honey is also missing bee pollen, originating from China, to avoid detection. Scientists can detect a Chinese honey supply chain by using a sophisticated analysis process. They can identify the pollen of flowers from a specific geographic region, and detect up to 40 unnatural substances, including antibiotics and pesticides residues. There are more than 350,000 different plant species, each of which produces a unique pollen type. It is important to know where honey comes from, because individual countries have different regulations for the use of pesticides or antibiotics.
Interesting. How can they remove pollen from honey? I have never heard of it.
To avoid detection, some Chinese honey producers developed the state-of-the-art process to heat the honey under high pressure, with ultrafiltration to remove all floral fingerprints. As a result, their honey has no color or flavor. Then, they blend it with real Indian honey. Consequently, Indian honey was banned by the European Union in 2010. However, during that same period, the United States Department of Agriculture reported that nearly 38 million pounds of honey came from India, the same honey that was banned by the European Union.
That is quite disturbing. American consumers ate banned honey by the European Union. How could the United States government allow such thing to happen?
Joanna, we will talk about this issue in later podcast. In 2011, according to Food Safety News, more than 75% of the honey sold in United States grocery stores is missing pollen. Without pollen, there is no way to determine whether the honey came from legitimate and safe sources. For many centuries, bee pollen has been valued for its flavor and nutritional value. The only reason for all the pollen to be filtered out is to hide its flower print from China.
Why is Asian honey cheaper?
Asian beekeepers frequently harvest unripe honey with high water content. Then, their honey is highly processed to filter residues and pollen, dehumidified, and diluted with syrup. As a result, the final processed honey is lacking nutrients that the pure natural honey offers, and may be hazardous to consumers. Cheap honey has a higher probability of being adulterated. In recent years, many Chinese shippers have eliminated the honey completely and just use colored sweeteners labeled as honey. In 2020, Business Standard, a local India newspaper reported, small honey companies have been driven out of business for the past few years, because they could not compete with the cheaper adulterated honey, mixed with syrup from China. Standard tests were not able to detect the adulteration. Investigators had to use an advanced laboratory test called nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, NMR, in Germany, to detect the adulteration in honey from major Indian brands.
Now, I am totally disgusted. It is amazing how some people can go this far, to increase profit, and mislead consumers. It is so unethical.
Joanna, do you know that Chinese honey is exported from Europe? Yes, it is true. Can you imagine buying honey exported from Europe but it is actually Chinese honey? What I am about to say will make you think twice before buying honey.
Wait a minute. European honey may come from China? Oh my God.
Norberto Garcia is professor of apiculture and chairman of the United States Pharmacopoeia expert panel on honey quality and authenticity. Professor Garcia has worked intensely during recent years to create awareness on the problems of honey adulteration in different national and international meetings.
Matthew, what is Professor of Apiculture? What does it mean?
Apiculture is a fancy word for beekeeping. In his 2018 report, Professor Garcia demonstrated and highlighted the following points. Cheap Chinese honey could have provided an incentive for several European countries to import honey from China, and then re-export it as locally produced in Europe. Particularly, Spain, Belgium, Poland, Italy, and Portugal have shown a 200% increase of their total honey export volumes over 10 years. That expansion cannot be explained by an increase of their number of beehives, which only grew by 2.7% over that same period.
I also heard European honey is mixed with sugar. Is that true?
Yes, it is true. The European Union found 14% of honey had added sugar. In 2015, the European Commission organized a coordinated control plan to evaluate the situation of honey being adulterated with sugar and mislabeled with regard to their geographical origin. Overall, the results suggest that the practice of adding sugars to honey is occurring both within the European Union and in third world countries. Honey is regulated in the European Union by the Honey Directive, but the requirements for declaring the origin of honey are extremely low. Most honey is labeled blend of European Union and non-European Union honeys.
As we discussed earlier, the labeling does not help much, because Chinese honey is exported to Europe, then relabeled as European honey, before being exported to the United States or to the world.
On top of that, the United States law enforcement do not protect consumers. The U.S. Customs Border Patrol can go after the honey smugglers by enforcing the anti-dumping tariff and the violation of laws. However, protecting consumers from dangerous honey falls within the United States Food and Drug Administration Authority, or the FDA. Unfortunately, the FDA does not have the proper resources to commit to such a challenging task. In 2018, the FDA issued a recommendation guidance to list additional ingredients to honey on the label such as syrup or flavor, but the FDA does not legally enforce the rule.
It is disturbing to hear that consumers have no protection from dangerous Chinese honey.
Joanna, let me tell you something about our government. The United States is more interested in busting illegal Chinese honey imports than the health of its citizens. In Savannah, Georgia, the United States Customs and Border Protection's laboratory has the following mission. Determine whether the honey samples are adulterated with sweeteners or syrups. If the samples contain real honey, the lab will try to figure out the origin. If the honey comes from China, the entire shipment may be subject to additional taxes. Around 2006, dishonest importers mixed honey with rice syrup to disguise honey as an artificial blend. The problem is the lab cannot determine the ratio of honey to syrup. Therefore, if the importers claim that the product contains less than 50% of real honey, they can escape the honey import tariff. Chemists at the lab here have tested thousands of samples pulled from barrels and containers at ports across the Southeast. In 2008, the lab demonstrated that honey imported from Thailand, the Philippines, and Russia, had originated in China. The evidence helped federal prosecutors build a case against two large American importers who were suspected of buying illegal Chinese honey to avoid more than $180 million in duties.
It is a shame. Last weekend, I bought a pound of honey from the local farmer's market. I must admit that it was the best tasting honey I have eaten. It does not taste like any of the honey that I bought at the regular supermarket.
Well, you just need to be careful. When purchasing honey, it is safer to purchase it at natural food stores, or local farmers markets. Look for raw, unprocessed honey with pollen, and carefully review the country of origin. These are red flags. Highly processed and ultra-clear honey. Cheap honey. Honey without flavor. Watery honey. Non-European Union sources, or blended with non-European Union. Product origin not mentioned. Individually packed honey.
I am so glad that we did some good research to speak the truth about honey in this podcast. It is quite disturbing. Let's talk about how consumers can get higher quality honey.
To differentiate high-quality honey from adulterated honey, Australia and New Zealand have developed and marketed Manuka honey. Brazil and Mexico export organic honey. The good news is there is a website called TrueSourceHoney.com. The website was launched in 2010 to educate and provide information about honey. About 40% of honey sold in the United States and Canada is TrueSource certified.
It is good to know. There is hope for honey lovers. I will look for Manuka honey and TrueSource certified honey. Now, you know why we said you are better off eating sugar than honey at the beginning of the podcast. Because the chance of you buying Chinese honey, without knowing, can be pretty high. But the good news is, after listening to our podcast, you can minimize that probability.
Before ending the podcast, we want to go over a few successful cases reported by the United States Department of Homeland Security. In 2008, federal authorities began investigating honey brokers evading anti-dumping duties through illegal imports, including transshipment and mislabeling on the supply side of the honey industry. The second phase of the investigation involved allegations of illegal buying and trading of honey smuggling into the United States, on the demand side of the industry. Some of that honey was contaminated with antibiotics banned in food by the FDA.
2011, a Chinese business agent for several honey import companies was arrested in Los Angeles on federal charges for illegally importing Chinese origin honey. The honey was falsely identified as originating in South Korea, Taiwan, and Thailand to avoid the high anti-dumping tariff. 3 people of Chinese origin have been charged for smuggling honey into the United States via 11 ports and providing false descriptions of the merchandise. Chinese honey containers were labeled as rice fructose in order to avoid more than $1 million in duties. Once the containers of honey passed through customs, they were forwarded to a warehouse, washed off all markings, and relabeled as amber honey. Then, the honey was sold to domestic purchasers.
2012, Chinese origin honey was falsely identified as originating in South Korea, to avoid U.S. high anti-dumping tariffs. The Chinese importer pleaded guilty to the charges, and was required to pay $1.5 million in restitution. This case relates to an investigation of the honey importing practices of Alfred L. Wolf Incorporated, ALW, a German international trading company, whose U.S. subsidiary was based in Chicago. In 2010, a federal grand jury in Chicago indicted 8 ALW executives, and 1 non-ALW executive in an $80 million honey fraud importation ring, all of whom are foreign fugitives.
2013, 2 of the nation's largest honey suppliers were accused of flooding the market with cheaper honey from China and avoiding $180 million in duties. Baytown, Texas-based Honey Holding and Michigan-based Grove Farms agreed to pay $1 million and $2 million in fines respectively. Grove Farms filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection after it was caught. The company's bankruptcy filing halted several lawsuits filed earlier by honey producers and distributors who claimed they were harmed in the scandal. Grove Farms sold $137.9 million worth of honey and other products in 2012, according to court papers. A Chinese origin broker from Temple City, California, pleaded guilty to 3 counts of violating U.S. importation laws by falsely declaring that the honey shipments contained sugar syrup and apple juice concentrate to avoid $39.2 million in anti-dumping duties. A Texas honey broker was sentenced in Illinois to 3 years in prison and $2.89 million in penalties for evading nearly $38 million in tariffs on Chinese origin honey. The honey was misrepresented as originating in India or Malaysia to avoid anti-dumping duties when it entered the United States. In addition, the broker admitted that he sold Vietnamese honey that tested positive for the presence of chloramphenicol, an antibiotic not allowed in U.S. honey or other food products.
2015, officers from the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the Homeland Security Investigations, and the Customs and Border Protection seized 660 barrels of illegally imported Chinese honey valued at $2.5 million. The confiscated barrels weighed 203.3 metric tons. The container shipping documents falsely indicated the bulk honey came from Latvia, a country in the Baltic region of Northern Europe.
2016, the Homeland Security Investigations in Chicago seized nearly 60 tons of honey, illegally imported from China. The 3 shipping containers holding 195 barrels of bulk honey, smuggled into the United States, were falsely declared as originating from Vietnam, to evade anti-dumping tariff. Federal agents in Chicago was notified of the suspect honey by a domestic honey packer, located in the Midwest. Then, the agency sent honey samples to the United States Customs and Border Protection's laboratory in Savannah, Georgia, for analysis. It concluded that the honey was Chinese origin. The contents of the podcast are from our book, China Death Food. Please share the information with your friends and family because Chinese honey can be toxic.
This is the end of our podcast. Thank you for listening. Please visit our website at abonbon.com for more resources and publication.
You may also buy us coffee by clicking on the support show link. Thank you and have a great day.